Very troubling story out of Missouri. The predominantly white school district of Warrensburg is apologizing after a student waved a Donald Trump campaign sign during player introductions for an all-minority Kansas City basketball team. Video shows several students, many wearing cowboy hats, turning their backs on the visiting team while they were introduced. The Warrensburg School District apologized in its official Facebook page earlier this week, saying it would try to prevent similar incidents like this in the future. Superintendent Scott Patrick tells the Kansas City Star the back turning is a long-standing practice, but the campaign sign, quote, took this from something that was unsportsmanlike to something that was insensitive, not necessary, and inappropriate. Warrensburg Schools District is 80% white. The Center District is 19% white. Stephen A., this makes me sick. What is your reaction?
Well, my reaction is that I think it was perfectly explained when the individual that you just quoted talked about how it's a long-standing tradition for them to actually turn their back to the opposition. It wasn't until the actual Trump sign was hoisted by somebody that it became racially insensitive and beyond. If you're turning your back to an opponent and that's your tradition to sort of disrespect them and create some kind of hostile working environment for the opponent, oh, I've seen people do crazy stuff, no question about it. I remember when Olden Polynice years ago got himself in trouble trying to steal records when he was in college and he went to Duke, and the fans at Duke at Caron Indoor Stadium literally threw records on the court to mock him and things of that nature. They did crazy stuff and it was all in fun. This wasn't because of that Trump sign, which brings us to our president-elect and what we're looking at here. And it's one of those situations where the president-elect is going to have to stand up at some point and acknowledge responsibility for a base, a segment of our population out there that he was more than willing to cater to in order to garner votes. You're going to have people who think he's racist. You're going to have people who think he's not. Right now, that conversation is counterproductive because he will be our president of the United States. But what it is important to recognize is the fact that you had no inhibitions whatsoever about peeling, even if it's to a small segment of our populace, a segment of our populace that clearly harbors those feelings and basically adds credence and substance to the proclamation made by Van Jones of CNN the night of the election on November 9th, when he said, and he called it a white lash. Now, there are white people out there who got offended, and they should be offended if indeed he were not talking about them, because he's alluding to them just by virtue of you being white and you voting for Trump. You must have felt a certain way. I think that's not fair to a lot of white Americans out there who may have had different reasons for voting for who they voted for. But to the folks who did vote for Trump, who do harbor those sentiments, who do feel that level of vitriol towards different ethnicities, Trump has to stand up, man up, and acknowledge that indeed he didn't mind catering to those, or at the very least, address them more fervently, more vehemently in decrying the positions that they take. Because the more divisive we are as a nation under his presidency, the more difficult it's going to be for him or for Congress and the Senate or beyond to get things done and move this nation in a forward direction. This is emblematic of the problems that await, because there are white individuals out there who have supported Donald Trump, who believe, hey, it's us against everybody else in America. We don't like them, and we have someone who supports our racist, bigoted, prejudiced views, and we don't care because we feel the freedom now to express it. By the way, Max, that never happened under Barack Obama. You didn't see people out there going like this, well, because Barack Obama's our president, we're going to convey these points of views, and this is how we feel. That's not what I saw.
Well, there was plenty
I'm seeing it now.
There was plenty of racist coverage of Barack Obama's presidency. Let's call it what it is.
Okay. Now, I'm talking about the supporters of Barack Obama.
I want to take this one at a time. One, if the explanation is, as you stated, that this is a tradition that they do, there happened to be a Trump sign there because that's their guy, okay, I'm going to table some other things to say about that for a second. And it's a misunderstanding. It was put together in a way that made it seem racist when it wasn't. Okay, that's one explanation. I hope that's the case, as a matter of fact. If it's the case that this actually reflects that it wasn't such a misunderstanding and it reflects some racist feelings, then I would say shame on the parents of the students who did it, because it reflects a broken culture in the home. And if it is not that, but it's not about the home, but rather about these kids acting independently, and in fact it was meant in some racist way, then again, shame on the parents. Do a better job raising your kids. But I'm hoping that the latter two are not the case, that in fact it is some kind of a misunderstanding, and it doesn't reflect a broken culture in the home or a culture of negligence as it relates to raising children. I mean, these are high school kids. And I'm not saying that all Trump supporters are racist, bad people, Stephen A. You and I agree about that. But at the very least, his candidacy and then election has emboldened, or seemed certainly to embolden, some very bad elements in our midst, racist elements included. And when you say that he really needs to denounce that more vociferously, he has at one point said, hey, that's terrible, in an early interview after the election, that's terrible, people shouldn't do that. But he should be coming out and saying, hey, in terms of my supporters who feel this way, that's bad, you shouldn't do that, and I want to distance myself from that. The question is, why hasn't he done that more? And the answer could be, if you look at the numbers, that it represents a bigger percentage of his support than many want to recognize.
Well, that's definitely possible. I just don't know whether or not that's factually correct, but it might be. I'm not so sure. My only point is, and I want to make sure that I'm clear to piggyback off the students turning their backs. I was talking about the tradition of turning your back on an opponent is something they didn't reserve for an all-black team coming to visit. According to the reports, they do it to any opponent that walks into their building when the team is introduced. The only aberration that took place was that for a Trump sign was hoisted on this particular night. And that's what changed the whole, visual of the situation, the whole imagery of the situation, which is why we're talking about it. At the end of the day, what it comes down to is that, again, when Van Jones talked about the election being whitewashed, being a whitewash, and that's what it was, this gives credence to that kind of argument, because we're hearing people coming out that clearly feel emboldened because he's the president, and as a result, they think because he's going to be the president that things are going to change back to the way they used to be, which is code in the African American community to feel something entirely different. It's what we cannot ignore. We have to pay attention to. You and I both know that. This is an example of that, and he needs to address it.
And incidentally, whether or not the candidate or the president-elect or a president or elected official is in fact themselves racist, because you've dealt with Donald Trump, so have I, by the way, and I have not found that to be the case. He was a New Yorker and all this stuff, so we were familiar, if you lived in New York for years, with the tabloids, and he was everywhere. And that's not what most people will tell you, that they think that he is actually racist. However, if enough supporters or enough of your support come from people who harbor those kind of feelings, then I agree with you, of course, and with conscientious people, that he needs to use his influence among that lot to give them a better understanding of the right way to be, and not to embolden their lesser kind of instincts, but instead appeal to their better angels, even if appealing to their better angels is not how he got elected.
I just find this whole story, all of this, so frustrating. This is America. We're a melting pot. Look at us on the show. We're all different cultures, religions, races. Can people please try respecting one another? Do we want to be like what's happening over in Syria, what we're seeing right now? It's just so frustrating. On a much lighter note, though, we will get back to sports. How will you remember Craig?
I can't really put it much better than Charles Barkley and Steve Kerr put it. Obviously, they worked with Craig Sager for years. They know him better than me, better than a lot of people, but those of us who have covered the NBA for many years, we know how synonymous he is with the NBA in the world of sports, and we know what a wonderful human being he was. He was always very gentle. He was always very kind. Charles Barkley put it best when he talked about how he was full of life, and he's never met anybody that loved life and wanted to live more than Craig Sager. And so you hear about his passing. It was, it's just devastating to all of us who covered the NBA and who have been around him. When ESPN worked the deal out with Turner to allow Craig Sager to cover his first NBA Finals, I remember LeBron James asking, how in God's name, after all of these years, 20 plus years, have you never covered the NBA Finals until now? It just didn't seem right. It just seemed so perfect when he was there for Game 6 for Cleveland and the Golden State, because it clearly was where he belonged. And I watched him work the arena, just walking around, even beforehand, people wanting to take pictures with him, clamoring for him, thanking him for the strength that he instilled in so many people. To see the standing ovation that he received during the game was incredibly touching. And then when Steve Kerr spoke last night, prior to the Knicks game, the Warriors game against the Knicks, Steve Kerr, who, he's a very good man, and we all know that about him, he actually put a smile on my face, because by him saying and reminding us all how Craig Sager would have wanted us to conduct ourselves, for it to be a celebration to some degree, it made me smile, because I thought about the last time I had spoken to Craig Sager. Craig Sager walked up to me, and we all know, Max and Molly, that he's very well known for the colorful outfits that he wears. And he walked up to me, and like Kobe Bryant said on Mike and Mike earlier today, everyone always looked forward to whatever outfit we were going to see Craig Sager in, because clearly he owned it. He could pull it off. Most of us couldn't. Most of us wouldn't even think about trying. But when it came to him, he would pull it off every time, and he didn't care. This is what he loved. That's how he loved to look. God bless him. And so he came up to me, and he said to me, "Steven, you look great." And I looked around and was like, what's wrong with my outfit? Why is he saying that? I mean, do I have on something wild or whatever the case may be? And that's what I thought about last night. It just put a smile on my face, because I remember how I was questioning the outfit that I had on, because he was telling me how good my outfit looked when he saw me at Quicken Loans Arena. And so I just think about it from that perspective. I'm sad for his lovely wife, Stacy, his 5 kids, the TNT family. I know all of those folks, and he was a special man, and he meant a great, great deal to the NBA community, and we're all going to miss him. It's a devastating loss for everybody associated with the NBA, with the world of sports, and for folks out there battling cancer. My words to them, including people like my own mom, is just keep the fight up, keep going, keep pushing. Because Craig Sager certainly did that to the best of his ability. And as sad as it is to see him gone, we owe him an incredible debt of gratitude for the life that he lived and what he was willing to put on display and share with us all. We're all better because of it.
Yeah, I think that Craig Sager's life shows that if you treat people with kindness and you have a sense of humor about yourself and use obstacles and hardships in your own life as a source of inspiration to uplift others, you will be loved. And I think what's most telling about the way Craig Sager lived his life, and I did not know him personally, we crossed paths a couple times, but didn't know him personally, had no personal relationship. And as a basketball fan and as a person who lives in this culture, I was very sad, of course, like everyone else, when I'd heard he'd passed, and was upset even when the news first became public that he was struggling with his illness. I think the greatest tribute is the people who knew him best. The closer they were to him, the more upset they were, the more they loved him. That's not the case with everyone. But in this building, I'm in LA now, where I did Sports Nation for 3 years before joining this show, Stephen A. And in this building, everyone was obviously sad and depressed about it, but the people who knew him were weeping. The way Charles Barkley was crying on television, Michelle Beadle and Rachel Nichols were weeping yesterday. And when we discussed how we were going to handle it, because I did Sports Nation for old time's sake while I was here yesterday, I appeared on the show throughout the show, and we had all these things planned, and then the news came out 5 or 10 minutes before we went to air, whatever it was. And the question was, how do we handle something like this? And the decision, at first, maybe we just make the whole thing a tribute to Craig Sager. And the decision ultimately was, what would he do? And how would he want this handled? Probably embarrassed by the attention. But if you look at how he lived his life, he went to work, didn't ask anyone to feel sorry for him, and did his job basically up until the very end without asking for special treatment or anything like that. And so it was decided the best way to honor him and his legacy is to carry on and do the show. So we did a tribute segment off the top, as we are doing here, and discussed it because you can't ignore it, obviously. And then carried on and did the show as he did, as he carried on. I just think, as I said, the greatest tribute to him is you'll notice in the media reaction, people watching at home, the people who knew him best are the ones who will be weeping today.
Well, the thing that resonates with me as well is the great Ernie Johnson, who's a cancer survivor, who would go to see him to fire him up and inspire him. And it turns out that it was the other way around. That's what Craig Sager did for him and so many others. And you think about the battles that people are fighting every single day in an effort to conquer cancer. And you think about the Jimmy V Foundation and what ESPN has been closely associated with and synonymous with for decades. And you think about all of those folks out there in such desperate need, not just of treatment, not just for a cure, but also for inspiration along the journey, along the battles. And then you think about a guy like Craig Sager, who would go to work and work a game at night and then turn around and fly to Houston the next day, the next morning, to receive his chemo, and then depart from there and go right back on the road. And then you sit there and you think about the times that you said to yourself, I'm tired, I'm not feeling well, I can't go, but there's really nothing wrong with you. You knew what was wrong with him, and somehow, some way, he showed up to work every chance he got. And it just serves as the greatest inspiration to all of us about what we can be made of if our heart and our mind is truly committed to something that we love so dearly. And I just think that that's an important message to reap from it all. But again, my heart goes out to his family, his loved ones, the TNT family, thanking Charles Barkley, Kenny Smith, Shaq and the crew, especially to Steve Kerr and that tremendous tribute to Greg Popovich, who spoke very sincerely about him. The man was loved in a great way by anybody associated with the NBA community, and the players, I think, are doing an incredible job of expressing their love and affection to him and their gratitude for all that he means and he meant to the game of basketball.
And I also want to add, Stephen A., our heart also goes out to anybody battling cancer. Our prayers are with them, including your mother as well.
Thank you.
Craig Sager, gone way too soon at the age of 65. He will be missed, but not forgotten.